In the heart of a grand, glittering mansion, a bitter argument echoed through its marble halls. The millionaire, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, stood firm, his voice cold and sharp. Across from him, his aging parents, fragile and worn, pleaded desperately. "Please, son, don't do this." His mother's voice quivered, her tear-streaked face etched with heartbreak. She clutched her hands tightly, as if holding onto the last threads of hope. But he dismissed her with a wave of his hand, his words cutting like ice. "I've already made arrangements. The old house will be more suitable for you." The father, silent and stoic, began packing their modest belongings into a worn suitcase. His trembling hands betrayed the pain he refused to show. The mother's voice broke again, softer this time, almost a whisper. "Why, my son? After everything we've done for you?" He didn't respond. He couldn't. The guilt lingered for just a moment before he pushed it aside, turning away without a second glance. As the door to their once shared home closed behind them, the weight of their sorrow hung in the air. He thought wealth could replace love, but he was about to learn a lesson money could never buy. He was a self-made millionaire, a man who clawed his way to the top, building his empire brick by brick. To the world, he was the epitome of success, living in a mansion adorned with chandeliers, luxury cars lining the driveway, and a life dripping in wealth. But behind the closed doors of his lavish lifestyle, his heart had grown cold, valuing money over the relationships that once defined his life. His parents, the very people who sacrificed everything for him, were now seen as burdens. In his childhood, they had worked tirelessly, his father taking grueling shifts at a factory, his mother stitching clothes late into the night, just to ensure he had an education, a future. They had gone without so he could have it all. But now, standing in the glow of his success, he dismissed those memories as relics of the past. He decided that his parents no longer belonged in his world. To him, their love was now an inconvenience. "They'll be more comfortable in the old house," he told himself, as if trying to convince his own conscience. The old house was a shadow of his opulent mansion, small, run down, and lonely. But to him, it was good enough for them. He rationalized it with cold practicality, believing it was the right decision for everyone. As the movers packed their belongings into a truck, his parents stood silently, their faces etched with quiet pain. He didn't notice or didn't care. To him, they no longer fit into his picture-perfect life. What he didn't realize was that the comfort he so eagerly pushed them toward would soon reveal the true emptiness of his own soul. The old house stood at the end of a narrow, forgotten street. Its walls were cracked and peeling, its windows dusty and clouded with years of neglect. Inside, the air felt heavy, filled with the scent of damp wood and despair. It was nothing like the warm, loving home they had once known, a place where laughter echoed and dreams were nurtured. The mother struggled in the tiny, dimly lit kitchen. The stove was ancient and broken, with one burner flickering like a dying ember. She sighed as she tried to cook a simple meal, her hands trembling from exhaustion. The cupboards were nearly bare, holding only the essentials, a stark reminder of how far they'd fallen from their son's luxurious world. In the next room, the father crouched on aching knees, repairing a broken chair with what little tools he had. His hands, calloused from years of hard work, moved steadily, though his eyes betrayed a quiet sorrow. He worked not out of necessity, but to fill the endless, lonely hours that now stretched before them. At night, they sat together on a worn-out sofa, its fabric faded and torn. The mother rested her head on the father's shoulder, her voice soft and wistful. "Do you remember how he used to laugh when he came home from school? He'd run to me, holding up his grades, so proud." The father nodded, a faint smile crossing his tired face. "And how he'd fall asleep in my lap after I read him those silly bedtime stories. He always said he wanted to make us proud." Their memories were their only comfort in this desolate place. They consoled each other with stories of his childhood, clinging to the hope that somewhere beneath his cold exterior, their son still carried the love they once knew. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of loneliness grew heavier. The cracks in the walls mirrored the cracks in their hearts, fragile, exposed, and waiting to be mended. Meanwhile, back at the millionaire's mansion, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. The grand party was a spectacle of opulence. Chandeliers glittered overhead, waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne, and a live band played soft jazz in the corner. The millionaire stood at the center of it all, the epitome of success and power. He raised his glass for a toast, his voice full of pride and arrogance. To hard work, determination, and making it on your own. I built all of this, every last bit of it, with no help from anyone. I don't owe anyone anything. His words were met with applause and cheers, his guests eager to bask in his wealth and success. They flattered him endlessly, praising his business acumen and the empire he had created. To them, he was untouchable, a man who had achieved everything. But behind the confident smile and the dazzling facade, there were cracks beginning to show. As he stood in the midst of the party, surrounded by luxury and adoration, a strange emptiness crept into his chest. He glanced around the room. The laughter felt distant, the compliments hollow. Even as his colleagues clinked their glasses with his, their smiles seemed more calculated than genuine. For a brief moment, his gaze drifted to the family portrait hanging on the far wall. His parents' faces stared back at him, proud, loving, and full of hope for the son they had once cherished. He quickly turned away, brushing the thought aside, but the nagging emptiness lingered. The party roared on, the millionaire laughing and indulging with his guests. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing. He had built a life of luxury, but at what cost? Late one evening, as the millionaire lounged in his sprawling study, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, irritation flashing across his face. It was a call from the local clinic near the old house. "Your mother is unwell," the voice on the other end explained. "She's been admitted for observation." He sighed heavily, annoyed by the inconvenience. With a reluctant nod to himself, he grabbed his car keys. It wasn't concern that drove him. It was obligation, a chore to be crossed off his list. The clinic was stark and modest, a far cry from the luxurious private hospitals he frequented. He walked through the narrow hallway, his polished shoes echoing against the tiled floor. When he entered the small room, his steps faltered. There, on the narrow bed, lay his frail mother. Her once strong hands trembled as she clutched his father's fingers, her face pale and tired. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, but she didn't see him. Instead, she whispered softly to his father, her voice barely audible, "I don't want to be a burden to him. He's done so much. Let's not trouble him anymore." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He froze, his eyes darting between his parents. His father sat beside her, his expression stoic but his eyes glassy with emotion. For the first time in years, guilt stirred within him. He watched the two of them, frail yet holding each other up, and a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. As he left the clinic that night, his mother's words echoed in his head, louder than any applause or praise he had ever received. The weight of what he had done, what he had become, began to press down on him. Back in the quiet grandeur of his mansion, the millionaire sat alone in his study. The glow of the city lights outside painted his face, but his mind was far from the success he once celebrated. His mother's frail voice echoed in his thoughts, refusing to let him rest. He wandered aimlessly into a storage room, cluttered with relics of his past. As he sifted through the boxes, his hand brushed against something familiar, a dusty, old photo album. He hesitated, then pulled it out and flipped it open. The first picture stopped him in his tracks. His mother, young and radiant, smiling as she carried him in her arms. He remembered how she worked late into the night sewing clothes, her hands rough but her touch always gentle. The next image showed his father, standing in front of their tiny house with a toolbox in hand. He could still hear his father's voice saying, "It's not much, but it's ours. One day it'll all be for you." Page after page, the memories flooded back. birthday parties where they scraped together enough to buy him a gift, his father cheering at his school matches despite being exhausted from work, his mother staying up to help him study, her eyes heavy with sleep but her spirit unyielding. Tears welled up in his eyes as he closed the album. How had he become so blind? The people who gave him everything, who sacrificed their dreams for his future, were now in a cold, lonely house, while he drowned in luxury and isolation. For the first time, he felt the full weight of his choices. The mansion, the cars, the wealth. It all seemed hollow without the love that had built the foundation of his life. He stared at the photo album, its cover worn with time but filled with the moments that truly mattered. And in that moment, he realized just how far he had drifted from the man his parents had raised him to be. Late one evening, unable to quiet the storm in his heart, the millionaire decided to visit the old house unannounced. As his luxury car rolled down the worn, uneven road, he felt a strange mix of unease and anticipation. When he arrived, the sight before him left him stunned. The once proud couple who had given him everything now lived in a house that looked like it could collapse at any moment. The furniture was broken and patched together. The dim lighting barely illuminated the small, cramped rooms. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room in disbelief. In the corner, his father was bent over an old, rusted heater, struggling to fix it with shaky hands. Sweat beaded on his brow, but he pushed on, determined to bring some warmth to their frigid home. Hearing footsteps, his mother appeared from the kitchen, her face lighting up with surprise. "You've come," she said softly, her voice filled with a mix of joy and disbelief. Despite everything, she welcomed him with the same warmth she always had. She hurried to the kitchen, returning with a cup of tea. The cup was chipped and mismatched, but she held it out to him with a smile. "Here, have some tea. You're always welcome here, no matter what." Those simple words pierced his heart. Tears filled his eyes as he took the cup, his hands trembling. How could they still offer him kindness after everything he had done? "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything, for abandoning you, for not seeing how much you've done for me." His mother placed a hand on his cheek, her eyes brimming with love. "You're our son. We've never stopped loving you, and we never will." The father, setting aside his tools, placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "It's never too late to come home, son." Overwhelmed by their unconditional love, he broke down, tears streaming freely. In that moment, he realized the depth of their sacrifice and the strength of their love, something no amount of money could ever replace. The next morning, the millionaire returned to the old house with a determination he had never felt before. His parents watched in stunned silence as he knelt before them, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm taking you both home," he said firmly, "back where you belong. The mansion is yours. It always has been." His mother's eyes widened, and she exchanged a hesitant glance with her husband. "But we don't want to be a burden to you," she whispered. He shook his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "You could never be a burden. Everything I have is because of you. That house isn't a mansion without you in it. It's just an empty shell." Reluctantly, they agreed, still unsure if they deserved the life he was offering. But his determination left no room for argument. When they arrived at the mansion, the parents hesitated at the door, overwhelmed by its grandeur. But their son took their hands, leading them inside with a warm smile. "I've prepared something special for you," he said, guiding them to a room he had transformed overnight. The once empty space was now the grandest in the house. The walls were adorned with soft, calming colors, and their favorite family photos hung in elegant frames. A cozy bed with plush blankets sat at the center, surrounded by thoughtful touches. A sewing machine for his mother, a handcrafted toolbox for his father, and shelves filled with books and keepsakes they cherished. His mother stepped into the room, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. "You did all this for us?" The father, his usually stoic face softened, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "This is more than we could have ever dreamed of." The millionaire smiled, his voice gentle. "It's not more than you deserve. This is your home, just as it's always been. For the first time in years, the mansion felt warm and alive. Laughter echoed through its halls, filling every corner with love and gratitude. The family sat together that evening, sharing stories, laughter, and tears, as the weight of the past melted away. In that moment, the millionaire realized that true wealth wasn't in the walls of his mansion or the numbers in his bank account. It was here with his parents, in the love that had brought him full circle. The millionaire's life transformed in ways he never imagined. He no longer measured his success by the size of his bank account or the grandeur of his mansion. Instead, he found joy in the simple, priceless moments shared with his parents. Mornings were now spent listening to his father's stories and wisdom over coffee. Evenings were filled with laughter as his mother cooked their favorite meals, her warm smile lighting up the room. The emptiness that once consumed him was replaced by the love and connection he had nearly lost. But his change didn't stop there. Remembering the pain his parents endured, he made it his mission to help others. He donated generously to old-age homes, ensuring no elderly person would ever feel the loneliness his parents had faced. His wealth, once a source of pride, now became a tool for compassion. The final scene fades in, the family sitting together in the living room, laughter filling the air as they flip through old photo albums. The millionaire's voice breaks the moment. I almost lost the most valuable treasure I had, my parents. No success, no wealth, can ever replace the love of family. As the screen dims, the voice continues, treasure your loved ones before it's too late. Share this story to remind others of the power of family. And if this touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.